Chapter 16, The Mark of the Chosen. Joss felt the pulse of the lantern against his chest, its warmth contrasting the eerie cold of the ruins. The trial they had faced in Eldershade had left them shaken, but there was no turning back now. The path forward lay open, but it was one shrouded in uncertainty. Kaelin's eyes darted around the shifting stone corridors. "We should move. The ruins aren't stable, and I'd rather not be buried alive." Eldrin, still clutching his afflicted arm, nodded. "Something tells me the worst is yet to come." Joss took a deep breath and stepped forward. Each step echoed ominously, and with each passing second, the lantern's glow seemed to react, revealing markings along the walls, warnings, or perhaps guidance. They led downward, into the depths of something far older than the ruins themselves. The further they descended, the more oppressive the air became. Whispers floated through the corridors, barely audible yet persistent. Shadows flickered, moving in ways that defied logic. Then, at last, they entered a grand hall lined with stone pillars, each etched with scenes of figures wielding the very lantern Joss now carried. "They were like me," he murmured, tracing the ancient carvings. Marla approached cautiously. "And yet, none of them remain." A voice echoed through the chamber. "Not all." The group spun, weapons drawn. From the darkness emerged a spectral figure, clad in armor blackened with age. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow pits of blue fire. He looked at Joss with something akin to recognition. "You carry the burden," the spirit said. "But do you understand it?" Chapter 17, The Tomb of Echoes. The spirit raised an ethereal hand, and suddenly, the world around them shifted. The grand hall vanished, replaced by a battlefield of long ago. Phantom warriors clashed with creatures of shadow, their cries ringing through the air. Joss staggered. "What is this?" "The past," the spirit said. "The last stand of the lantern bearers. This is the fate of those who came before." The battle raged on, the bearers wielding the lantern's power to push back the encroaching darkness. But one by one, they fell, their light snuffed out. "No one has ever succeeded," the spirit continued. "The lantern is a curse as much as it is a gift. If you do not learn its true nature, you will share their fate." Joss clenched his fists. "Then teach me." The spirit studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. But be warned, knowledge comes at a price." The battlefield began to dissolve, but instead of returning to the grand hall, Joss found himself standing in a vast, empty void. The air felt thick, heavy with an unseen weight. Shadows flickered and coalesced into figures around him, spectral remnants of the fallen bearers. "You seek understanding," one of the figures rasped. "Then bear witness to our failure." Joss turned to see a young warrior, her lantern flickering weakly. She stood before a monstrous figure cloaked in darkness. She raised her weapon, but the creature moved with unnatural speed, shattering the lantern and consuming her in black fire. Her scream echoed in the void before she vanished. Every bearer thought they were ready, another voice intoned. Every bearer believed they could tame the lantern's power. They were wrong. Joss swallowed hard. "Then why give me this vision? What am I supposed to do?" A different voice whispered, almost kindly, "Understand. The lantern does not fight for you. It fights with you. Its power is not yours to command, it must be earned." Joss felt something stir within him. A warmth, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. He clutched the lantern at his chest, feeling its pulse synchronize with his own heartbeat. "Show me more," he said. "Show me what I must do." The shadows shifted, forming a towering gate of black stone before him. Strange symbols pulsed with dim, golden light, the same hue as the lantern's glow. The spirit from the grand hall appeared once more, his form wavering as if caught between worlds. "Beyond this gate lies truth," he said. "Step forward, and the lantern will reveal itself to you. But be warned, once you cross, there is no return." Joss took a deep breath and stepped toward the gate. As he did, the darkness surged forward, attempting to consume him. But this time, the lantern flared on its own, pushing back the void with a brilliant radiance. With a final step, Joss passed through the gate, and the world around him vanished in a blaze of golden fire. Chapter 18: A Blade in the Dark. The lantern's glow flickered as Joss stepped forward, his breath steady but his heart pounding. The path before him was narrow, lined with jagged stones that seemed to shift where he wasn't looking. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, blood, perhaps, long since dried but never forgotten. He reached the center of what could only be described as an ancient chamber carved from the mountain itself. At its heart stood a pedestal of smooth obsidian, and upon it lay a blade unlike any he had seen before. Its hilt was wrapped in deep blue cloth, embroidered with runes that shimmered faintly. The blade itself was black, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. Joss hesitated. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing down upon him. The lantern pulsed in warning, and he knew he was not alone. "Who dares disturb the blade?" A voice, deep and guttural, echoed through the cavern. Joss turned sharply, eyes scanning the darkness. Out of the shadows stepped a figure clad in tattered armor, its face obscured by a helm cracked down the center. It carried a sword similar to the one on the pedestal, but its edges shimmered with an eerie blue light. "I seek the truth," Joss replied, his voice steady. "Truth?" The warrior chuckled, a dry and hollow sound. "Truth comes at a price, lantern bearer. And I am the collector." Without warning, the figure lunged. Joss barely had time to react, raising the lantern just as the warrior's blade came crashing down. The impact sent him skidding backward, his boots scraping against the stone floor. He could feel the lantern's warmth growing, but it wasn't enough. "Not yet." The warrior advanced, relentless. "You are untrained. Unworthy. The blade will devour you." Joss gritted his teeth. He knew he couldn't outmatch the warrior in strength, but perhaps in something else. He sidestepped the next strike, allowing the warrior's momentum to carry him forward. At the last second, Joss twisted and slammed the lantern into the warrior's side. Light exploded from within, sending the warrior staggering. For the first time, Joss saw what lay beneath the armor, bones wrapped in spectral fire, a warrior long dead yet bound to this place. The warrior let out a low growl. Clever, but not enough. The blade in his hand erupted in blue flame, and the warrior came at him again. Joss knew he had no choice. With a steadying breath, he reached for the black blade on the pedestal. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, a shockwave of cold fire ran through him. His vision blurred, and for a split second, he saw flashes of memories that weren't his, battles fought in darkness, victories claimed in blood, a brotherhood lost to time. When he refocused, the warrior was upon him. But this time, Joss was ready. With one swift motion, he parried the attack. The black blade hummed in his grip, an extension of himself rather than a weapon. The warrior hesitated for the briefest moment, and Joss struck. The black steel met the spectral fire of the warrior's blade, and an explosion of light and shadow tore through the chamber. When the dust settled, the warrior was gone. Only the faint echo of his final words remained, "The blade remembers." "So must you." Joss exhaled, chest rising and falling heavily. He looked down at the blade in his hands. It was no ordinary weapon. It was a key, a test, a burden. And it was his now. Chapter 19: The Hunt Begins. The air was thick with tension as Joss emerged from the ancient cavern, the black blade still pulsing faintly in his grasp. He could feel the weight of its history, of the battles fought before his time. The lantern at his side flickered, casting long shadows against the rock walls of the mountain pass. The warrior had warned him, "The blade remembers." And now, so must he. As he stepped into the dim light of dawn, he caught sight of a figure waiting at the edge of the path. Veyna. Her cloak billowed slightly in the breeze, and her sharp gaze locked onto the sword at his side. "You found it," she said, voice unreadable. Joss nodded. "Not without cost." She studied him for a long moment before finally turning. "Come. We don't have much time. The hunt has begun." Joss fell into step beside her, unease settling in his gut. The hunt? Veyna's expression darkened. You wield the blade now, Joss. That means you are marked. There are those who have been watching, waiting. And they will come for you. Joss tightened his grip on the hilt. Let them come. She shot him a glance, something between concern and amusement. You don't understand. The hunt isn't a single enemy. It is a force, an ancient order that exists to ensure the blade never falls into the wrong hands. And they think my hands are the wrong ones? They don't think, Joss. They act. A distant howl broke the morning silence. Joss stiffened. It wasn't the sound of a wolf, at least, not any he had ever heard. It was something else, something deeper, more resonant, like the very air trembled in its wake. Veyna swore under her breath. They're closer than I thought. We need to move. Now. They hurried down the rocky path, weaving through the narrow cliffs as the sun barely crested the horizon. The howling grew louder, closer. Joss's pulse quickened. He could almost feel the presence of whatever was coming for them. Then, from the shadows of the trees, they emerged. Tall figures cloaked in midnight black, their faces obscured by silver masks etched with symbols Joss didn't recognize. Each carried a weapon, a spear, a curved blade, a bow with arrows that glowed with an eerie, greenish light. But it was their eyes that unsettled him most. Even through the masks, he could feel their gaze, sharp and unyielding. One stepped forward, the apparent leader. The blade does not belong to you. Surrender it, and your suffering will be swift. Joss's fingers curled around the hilt. And if I refuse? The leader tilted his head. Then the hunt begins in earnest. Veyna's hand went to her own blade, muscles tensed. We can't outrun them. Joss inhaled deeply. He knew what had to be done. Then we don't run. He raised the black blade, its dark edge gleaming in the dim light. We fight. The hunters moved as one, their weapons flashing in the morning glow. And with the first clash of steel, the hunt truly began. Chapter 20, The Veil of Midnight. The aftermath of battle left the clearing eerily silent, save for the distant rustling of the wind through the blackened trees. Joss stood over the fallen, his breath ragged, the blade in his grip now heavier than it had ever felt before. The hunters had retreated into the shadows, but he knew this was far from over. The hunt never truly ended. Veyna wiped blood from her cheek and turned to Joss, eyes sharp with urgency. We need to go. Now. He hesitated, glancing at the bodies around them. They'll be back. Stronger. Exactly, she said, gripping his arm. And we won't be here when they return. Joss reluctantly followed her, their steps hurried as they made their way deeper into the wilderness. The lantern at his side flickered, its glow dimmer than before, as though it too had suffered from the battle. The trees around them grew denser, the path less certain, but Veyna moved as if she knew exactly where she was going. Where are we heading? Joss asked. To the Veil of Midnight, she answered without turning. Joss frowned. I've never heard of it. Few have. It's a place hidden between the folds of this world and the next, a sanctuary where the blade's influence cannot reach you, or not easily, at least. The idea of safety felt foreign, almost impossible. And you think we'll be safe there? Safer than anywhere else. But we must hurry. The way is only open for a short time each night. They pushed forward, the forest growing darker despite the early hour. The air thickened, charged with an unnatural energy. Then, in the distance, Joss saw it, a shimmer, a rift in reality itself. It pulsed like a living thing, threads of silver and deep blue twisting within its depths. Veyna grabbed his wrist. Whatever happens, do not hesitate. Step through when I do. Joss nodded, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The wind howled behind them, carrying voices, no, whispers of those who still pursued them. Without another word, Veyna plunged into the veil. Joss took one last glance at the dark forest behind him before stepping into the unknown. A chill gripped his body, and then, silence.